Funding for the 11th Hour was made possible by grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Jr. Charitable Trust, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, the Vincent Astor Foundation, and by the members of 13.
Welcome to the 11th Hour. I'm Robert Lipsyte. Modern philosophy turns a lot of people off. It's abstract, it's theoretical, it doesn't seem to have a practical application. Example, this is Tarski's theory of truth. The sentence, snow is white, is true if and only if snow is white. You will have to take my word for it that Tarski's theory of truth was considered a major breakthrough of analytic philosophy. There are philosophers who have climbed down from the ivory tower, and we'll meet two of them. One helps doctors wrestle with ethical issues, like deciding when and how to tell you you're dying. And the other has created a program to teach critical thinking to 6-year-olds. Joining me is Matthew Lipman. After 16 years teaching philosophy at Columbia University, he left to found the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children at Montclair State College in New Jersey. He trains philosophers to train teachers to instruct school kids in the joy of reasoning. Thousands of schools around the country use his program, and we'll see it in action at the Tuscan School in Maplewood, New Jersey. But first, Dr. Lipman, a philosophical question. What is philosophy?
Well, the traditional definition is that it's the search for wisdom. But to me, it's improving reasoning and judgment with regards to the way people make and speak and do things.
Now, we're going to see your program in action in just a moment. Could you kind of help us by telling us what we're going to see, because it's not entirely linear what these young kids go through?
They read from a little children's novel about someone called Elfie, who's about their age, 7 or 8 years of age, and she's talking about her own thinking process. And in the course of that, she deals with some ethical issues and some educational problems that she's experiencing.
And the kids kind of come around in a not entirely linear way.
Right. They sort of form a little community of inquiry in the novel and in the classroom.
Okay. Well, let's get to it. It's very exciting. And could you start by reading from
I'd be glad
the novel?
Okay. Today, Seth said, Elfie hardly ever talks. Maybe she's not for real. That just shows how wrong he can be. Maybe I don't talk much, but I think all the time. I even think when I sleep. I don't have fancy dreams. I just think when I'm asleep about the same things I think about when I'm awake.
Last night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I said to myself, Elfie, are you asleep? I touched my eyes and they were open. So I said, no, I'm not asleep. But that could be wrong. Maybe a person could sleep with her eyes open. Then I said to myself, at this moment, am I thinking? I really wonder. And I answered myself, dummy, if you can wonder, you must be thinking. And if you're thinking, then no matter what Seth says, you're for real. Okay, so what was puzzling or interesting in that part? Jacqueline?
If she wasn't a real person, how can she think or talk?
If she wasn't a real person, how could she think or talk? Okay.
How could she have dreams and think at the same time? Why did she touch her eyes?
Okay.
They were open. Why couldn't she touch something else?
Well, let's discuss that when we have our discussion. That's an interesting question.
Maybe some people can go to sleep with their eyes open. Oh, man!
Let's look at Jacqueline's question, number 1. If Elfie wasn't a real person, how could she think or talk? What do you think about that? Jordan?
If Elfie wasn't real, then she wouldn't be able to think. She wouldn't even be able to move every part of her body and stuff like that.
Alex?
I agree with Jordan, because if you weren't real, you'd just be a model and you wouldn't be able to hear and everything.
You'd just be a model.
And
Okay, Owen?
Well, I disagree with Jordan because, well, he wouldn't, what do you mean he wouldn't, like, not be able to move any part of his body? What if, like, they were a robot?
Well, that's an interesting question.
A robot can move a part of his body, and a robot isn't real.
Now, is a robot a person? Kristen?
A robot isn't a person because it's a robot, it's not a person.
Well, let's think about this for a minute. Supposing something came in through the door right now and it looked just like a person and it talked and it moved. How would we know whether it was a real person or a robot that looked like a person? Matthew?
Well, on this movie, this person, this father made a robot, but you always can put like materials over it to make it look like skin and make it look like a real person, so it could go to school and everything, and then its robot brain could learn so much that it would be like a perfect robot.
Can you think of any test that you could give it to find out whether it was a robot or a real person?
Well, you could like throw a needle at it, and if it doesn't go through it, then it would be a robot.
So that would be a test that you could tell the difference between a robot and a person? You could throw a needle at it? Supposing it was a person.
I think that's not really a good idea to find out how it works, because if it was a real person, it would hurt very badly, and the person could get hurt. I think that it's pretty good, but you shouldn't do it. You should pick a different way to find out.
Jordan?
Well, a way that you could do it is if you send it to a doctor, and if you put a needle in, blood would have to come out. I disagree with everyone who said that they could take it to the doctor, because you have to like take them in a car, right? What if it was a real robot? It might be able to break out of the car. So
it might be difficult to do this test. Okay. Let's look at the next question here. Kristen, why did she say to herself, "Dummy, if you can wonder, you must be thinking"? Let's go back a bit. What was it she was wondering about? Does anyone remember what she was wondering about?
Oh,
Sarah?
I know.
Tell the whole class that.
It says in the book that if you can't dream, if I can dream, I must be thinking. So she's really talking about dreaming and thinking.
She's really talking about dreaming and thinking?
She was thinking about if she was real or not. I'm thinking what to say, and I'm for real right now. If you're thinking, you must be for real.
Well, philosophy looks like fun, but let me ask, which was not my experience in college, but let me ask you this. What makes that philosophy? I mean, it seems like so many other things.
They're reasoning together. They're exploring concepts together, concepts like what is real, what is a person. They are dealing with the conditions of knowledge, such as that that your opinions have to be backed up with reasons, or exploring how you know something, or what evidence do you have for saying something. So there are many things that they are doing that are very similar to what a professional philosopher would do.
But kids don't learn to do this in any structured way normally in school?
No.
No.
I don't think so. I think that we teach syntax, and we teach spelling, and we teach the grammatical rules by which we understand language, but we don't teach the logic, we don't teach the reasoning process, we don't have an approach that tells them what are better and worse ways of reasoning, better and worse ways of thinking.
What is the boundary between doing philosophy as these kids do it and things like discussing values and secular humanism and all the things that seem to cause friction in a lot of school systems around the country?
Well, because we are only concerned with their questions, their problems, the issues that concern them, and helping them think and reason better and to make sounder judgments regarding the things that are problematic to them. There's no indoctrination here, there's no imposition of a set of values which any group in the community might say, this is not our values, why are you imposing them on our children?
Philosophy is a kind of a musculature here.
Yeah,
isn't it,
that's a
sense?
beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah.
It provides the musculature for thinking effectively, for reaching conclusions from premises. And without that, you have a kind of feeble, weak way of thinking.
But do you think that a generation of kids trained in this way will be better doctors, better journalists?
They'll be reflective about their own practice, and that's very important. They won't just be theoreticians who never practice, and they won't be practitioners who never think. They will be people who put theory and practice together.
Yeah.
And I think that's extremely important for what we do. If we can get children to use criteria, for example, when they make judgments, and be able to cite those criteria, then when they get to be teachers and doctors and lawyers and whatever, they will be able to say why they took the position they did and to justify it.
Yeah, and this whole idea of needing people to come in, medical ethicists, for example, really shows a certain bankruptcy in entire professions.
In the entire profession, because the ways in which the professions are taught and the other disciplines are taught too, it's all bricks and no mortar. There's nothing intellectual to hold the parts of the system together so that you think about the relationship, the connections. And one of the stresses of our program is thinking about relationships.
One quick question out of left field. In terms of religion, it seems that this kind of thinking might create a rub with certain kinds of traditional religious thinking, particularly with kids who come from religious homes.
Well, it hasn't. I mean, we're in thousands of schools, and it hasn't. It's true that a few people have occasionally raised the question, is it possible that this will happen with our children? And we try to show them how respectful our approach is to minority positions, and that we, as a matter of fact, stand up for the minorities and the rights of people to have their own beliefs. So when they hear that, they back off.
Yeah. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave there.
Oh, that's
I wish I had taken your class when I was at Columbia. Thank you very much. Professor Lipman, I hope we'll see you again. We'll be back with a philosopher and a doctor, and with their dialogues on life and death. Joining me are Daniel Callahan, a philosopher who 20 years ago was the founder of the Hastings Center, a research institute devoted to ethical issues of medicine and biology, and Dr. Eric Cassell, an internist who specializes in terminal care. He's also a clinical professor of public health at the Cornell University Medical College. Welcome, gentlemen. And just to get a sense of how a physician and a philosopher do interact, we're going to pose a hypothetical problem. The physician has just gotten a preliminary biopsy that indicates the tumor may be malignant. I am now going to step out of the picture. It's the doctor and the doctor in the room dealing with this problem.
I suppose the first question that anyone would be interested in is, will you tell the patient the truth? You know, the great philosopher Immanuel Kant in the 18th century felt you should always tell the truth, regardless of the consequences, regardless of the pain. And I'm curious, would you agree with that and start with that attitude in mind?
Well, I think that one should always tell the truth. That's not the end of the matter. That's the beginning of the matter. And When I went into practice, which is almost 30 years ago, we did not tell the truth, and we didn't think of ourselves as liars then. We were going towards some goal. So I think that telling the truth now is part of a goal or a change in relationship of doctor and patient, and I think it has to be seen in those terms.
Well, what do you think patients expect of you, just in general? A patient who is knows there's a test been taken, and what are they looking for, do you think?
Once again, nowadays they're looking for the truth, but then they have doubts. I mean, who wants some doctor to come in and say, "Oh, well, hello, Charlie. By the way, you have cancer," and boom, that's it. Now that sentence has the truth in it, but what's much more important is the truth of the relationship between it. It's a truthful relationship towards a goal, which is Charlie's well-being.
Now, is that a goal that you and the patient set together, or is it your goal? I'm curious.
Well, I think we have to come together. I think that it has always been a joint goal, but in a more authoritarian time, I assumed that I knew what was the best for you, but it was your best that I was talking about. Now I believe that we see the patient and the physician coming to an understanding of what that goal is, what's in the patient's best behalf, coming to that together.
Is that a kind of mutual education? I mean, you try to talk about each other, what you're up to, what you want, where you're going?
It should be, certainly. I mean, I know best what that disease can do, what technology can do, what medicine can do, but nobody but the patient knows what the patient thinks is in his best interest, his in this instance.
So when you get something that's potentially very disturbing to a patient, I mean, does it matter who the patient is, what you say, or to what extent do you change what you say depending on the patient, or does the disease count most?
I think it matters who the patient is, what the dose of drug is, how the drug is given, how the truth is told in every word. I think it always matters. Now, you may say that's just a hedge. Now, I mean, are you telling the truth or aren't you telling the truth? Yes. Truth is the goal. Are
there occasionally patients who really say they want to hear the truth, but you have reason to think they don't want to hear the truth? I'm curious. If
yes,
so, what do you do in those cases?
I think that you try and find out whether they do or they don't want to hear the truth. I think a person has the right to hear what they want to hear. They have a right to be told in a way they want to be told, so it's your job to find out what is the way that person wants to be told.
But sometimes you will want to tell them things that they may not want to hear, so you have a problem with your hands on it.
Nobody wants to hear bad news, and particularly bad news, which in our nature, you know, we all look for doom instantly. Nobody wants to hear bad news, and I have to tell people bad news, but they ought to hear bad news in a way that fits the way they want it to be told. I think that is the case. And sometimes you have to tell people things they don't want to hear, no matter how they set it ahead.
So you feel your job isn't just to protect the patient, it's somehow to bring the patient along to, you talked about a truthful relationship, and I suppose the question is that I suppose all of us would like that in our lives with anybody, but what does that mean in medicine, a truthful relationship?
Well, I think that the basis of it is that we have this goal, which is your well-being, that you should be better, even if you're dying, that you should be better. There is a better death and a worse death. And that in order to go towards that, I believe we have to have you as an active participant. I have to have your trust in me. And how could there be a relationship based in trust that wasn't basically a truthful relationship? That where you asked me something, you expected the truth. When I say a relationship in truth, that's what I mean. That if you ask me a question, ultimately, bottoms down, I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to be an honest person where you're concerned.
Let me stop this philosophical dialogue right now and ask a question. You call it philosophy. It kind of sounds to me like humanitarian thinking. The doctor no longer the godlike creature making decisions in other people's lives.
Well, in one sense, philosophy is interested in two things. It's certainly interested in certain moral truths. Is there a truth about falsehood and lying? Should we always tell the truth? That's a long-standing philosophical question. The other side of the coin is how do we talk about truth-telling in the context of actual human relationships? This is the kind of applied side. Anybody can say you should always tell the truth, or sometimes it's okay to lie. The question is, what difference does it make depending upon the person you're dealing with, a 5-year-old, a 30-year-old, an 80-year-old, a healthy person, a dying person? Context and relationship is part of really understanding the philosophical nature of things.
Did physicians feel threatened when philosophers first began talking to them?
Well, physicians get hives when philosophers come around. We like to believe we're pragmatists, we have this hard science, we do our thing, so we don't like people questioning us. I suspect that even interviewers don't like too many questions coming the other way.
Well, that's a very good point, and let's talk about that for a moment. I mean, you deal with life and death, but so do some other people. It would seem like a philosopher in a precinct house, a philosopher right here at the 11th hour, could do us all a world of good.
Well, we all have to have some way of looking at life. We have to have some way of dealing with our moral conflicts. And I suppose what philosophers have traditionally done is try to bring some clarification of that, try to get people, in a way, to step out of themselves a little bit, look on what they're doing, and ask, is it the right thing? What is the right thing? And how do I go about deciding what the right thing is? Those are hard questions, but in a way you can, I suppose philosophers have believed that you can make progress with them over a period of time. You can make sense and you come up with something.
What we've been talking about here today is being more reflective, thinking through things, stepping back, talking about our acts and their consequences. What does this have to do with all those courses in which I was made to memorize Schopenhauer and Kant and Spinoza and Plato?
Well, of course, there's a history to this field, and it goes back, in the West, it goes back to Plato and Aristotle, and I suppose the problem with the way the subject is often taught, it's taught as one more body of knowledge that you're supposed to memorize, and I tend to look at philosophy as very much trying to help us think about ourselves in relationship to the world, but that means not just memorizing facts or names or arguments, but constantly sort of turning it back in and saying, what do I want to be? What do I think is right and wrong? What kind of a person should I be? What is life all about? And that's a tough process. I think we'd all like to evade it simply by thinking, well, I'll read Plato and I'll learn the answer to that. Well, all Plato tells you is you better think much harder about yourself, and he doesn't give you an answer.
What about some of the hard stuff? Pulling feeding tubes, when to let someone live, when to let someone die?
Well, I think there's a perfect example of how philosophy has moved medicine forward. I mean, ordinary technical criteria will not tell you what to do in these circumstances. And physicians have been conflicted. Is my job to keep people alive at all costs? That's the way we used to talk 50 years ago, 20 years, 10 years ago. And is this the person I meant when I said at all costs? And yet, if I haven't been trained and there's nobody to help me think my way through it, generally, like everybody else, I drop back on pat answers or preconceived notions. So there is the perfect example. If I can say to some physician, well, I understand that you don't want to do it, but would you tell me why you're doing what you're doing? And doctors are smart people, and they're well trained, and with a little help, they get to like that. In the beginning, it makes it look like it's going to be harder, and I think what Dan is trying to point out is it doesn't make it harder, it makes it easier to do your work.
You're a better doctor since you've become a philosopher as well.
Well, there's just no question that I'm a happier doctor.
You saw those 6-year-old kids learning philosophy, and what did you think of that?
Well, it was wonderful. I mean,
well, had you been in that class when you were in the first grade, do you think you would have needed Dr. Callahan?
Yes, but you know, I think when I was in the first grade, and maybe you too, what somebody would have said is, well, we don't have time for that now, Eric. We're learning reading. So that it isn't so much that those kids have a natural bent. The why of children can be turned into a much more trained why. I was just told, like you were told, not now. And that class says, yes, now. So I think in that regard it was wonderful.
But the fact that we need philosophers to teach us things that seem so basic and human indicates that there's kind of something's missing in this society.
Well, in a way, yeah. In one sense, look, human beings never get the deepest, most difficult questions quite straight. That's why philosophy will always have, it's had something to do for 2,500 years and will always have something to do. On the other hand, a society is probably in trouble if it has to reduce everything to the deepest sort of philosophical question, because it no longer knows what's right and wrong anymore. Then a society is really in trouble. And if it's too desperate for philosophers, I don't think philosophers can help it at that point, ironically.
Yeah. Now, the rub between philosophy and religion, because some of these things we're talking about, particularly life and death in your field, are coming up against religious conviction.
Well, they are, but you know, what Dan is making is an important point, though. Nobody really knows how to live their life well, and yet it's all crucially important to us. In medicine, how do we view God? How do we view this sick person? And this business of being taught to somehow reason our way through to what is it we believe, rather than falling back too little and too late on answers that don't really meet our needs. What philosophy in medicine, anyway, allows doctors and people to do is to deal with the hard things that come down in a way that's not easy. It never is easy, but at least it's human.
Yeah. Last quick question. As the quickly appointed philosopher of the 11th hour, what should we be thinking about?
You should be thinking about your obligations to the public, what kind of person you want to be as somebody in journalism. What do you think the public needs to know? What are some of the problems in our society, and how do you get people to reflect more deeply upon those problems? Not just telling them their problems, they know that. They know it's a mess in our society in many places. The question is, what should they learn about to make a difference here, and what kind of a society ultimately do they want? That's the philosophical question, and the one that I think you can raise. You have to insinuate it, you have to push it in, but it's there and it's fundamental.
So we're going to have a philosopher with a beeper in the newsrooms as well as in the emergency room.
Don't smile, not bad idea.
It's a good idea. Dr. Cassell, Dr. Callahan, two philosophers, thank you very, very much. I think this is the 11th hour. Therefore, I'm Robert Lipsyte.
Their eyes open.
Funding for the 11th hour was made possible by grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Jr. Charitable Trust, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, the Vincent Astor Foundation, and by the members of 13.